But we also have lots of ideas about how to make your relocation successful. There are some other issues that we could talk about. So, for example, working from home, schooling, how you apply for visas, how you choose which sort of visa to apply for, how the cost of living compares, etc. So we've invited 4 of our chamber members to join us on stage even, on these 4 chairs here, rather close together, but perhaps they'd like to move them slightly apart. So if I could invite John Mather, our relocation expert from Émigré EU, to join us on stage. And if I could invite Paul Correa, who is the co-founder and managing director of Fiduciary Wealth Management, to join us on stage. Also Tânia Castro from TPMc, who's the managing director of TPMc, which we'll explain what TPMc does. And could I also ask Abigail Lewis, who is the head of school at the Nobel Algarve British International School, to come and join us on stage. Welcome, Abby. You're a new member of the chamber, and it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming. So you're all going to sit in a row like you're in school. Apologies, the chairs are rather close together, but thank you for allowing yourselves to sit there. Thank you. Now, I'm going to start with John. John, here we have you enlarged, well, black and white, and we have a little bit of a background about what Émigré EU does there. But John, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? Why did you end up living in Portugal? And what does Émigré EU do? Let's check it. Is it on? I think it's on. Yeah. Say something.
Mary had a little lamb.
Perfect. It's right.
The father shot the shepherd. Where do we go with it? Well, after being in financial services for 50 years, I thought it was time to retire. So when that vote went the wrong way in 2016, we thought, right, the lunatics are running the place, let's buy something in Madeira. Because we've been doing this with you for about 8.5 years now, haven't we? That was, the only regret I have of that is that I should have done it earlier. But I've given up my securities license in the UK, so I'm not going to sell you a pension. You're all right. But I did one of the talks for you, and somebody from the audience phoned afterwards and told me what he was going to do. He was buying this property. He'd never seen the property. And the more he talked about it, the more worried I got for him. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll go and have a look at the property. My business was all really property related throughout. I've done over 700 property transactions in my life on mainly commercial stuff. Well, the property wasn't 90% finished, it was 10% started. It had brilliant views, and his son, who was disabled, who didn't like noise, would have been disturbed by the major motorway that went down one side of it. So I told him the bad news, they just don't go ahead. This is nonsense. But having messed up his dream, I felt obliged to go and solve it. So I found him something better, negotiated, it was on the market for 900. I got it for 825. I got them to throw in 36,000 worth of furniture. I even got the plot next door bought to protect its view. And we did that on a pro bono basis. And then he put an article in the Sunday Times, putting my name in it. So now I have an office and an assistant, and I'm back to work.
So am I right in thinking, John, that Émigré EU, you are based in Madeira, to be fair, you're not on the mainland of Portugal, but your experience and approach applies anywhere in Portugal. But Émigré EU now, you come out of retirement and you're helping people relocate themselves and buy properties in Portugal, particularly in Madeira, because that's where you happen to live, isn't it?
Yes, we've got we used to have in my practice, we used to have 6 real estate offices. I mean, we had 78 staff in that. So it was, I used to enjoy, funny enough, the estate agency in Chelsea where I was based. But who helps the person buy? There's lots of good estate agents, and there are some that are not as good. So we need to buy on behalf of the client and work with good agents to acquire what the client wants. And quite often people are doing a trip, they're trying to make a decision quickly. So what typically we can do is find out what they want. Maybe we research about 40 properties for them, find it down to about 10, and then help them through the process. Find them a good lawyer, find them a good financial advisor, find them a good accountant,
Okay.
and help them hold their hand through that process, for which we charge a massive 1%.
How does the cost of living compare between the UK and Portugal, particularly Madeira, because you have a practical experience of that? Because everybody in the UK is very concerned about rising energy costs and prices in everyday living costs in the UK. How does it compare in Madeira, for example?
Well, we can't get out of the global price of energy. There's no standing charges as such, which is unfair. But the reason we spend very little on energy is we don't need to heat and we don't need to cool, apart from hot water. So we don't use as much. The cost of living generally, compared with London, is less than 50%. And the effect on discretionary spend, we did that model for you last year on somebody on 60,000 a year. The discretionary spend for that person in London was something like 20% of their gross pay. By taking advantage of the move to Madeira, that went up to 55% discretionary spend. And that's actually what matters in retirement, how much of your agenda you can write for yourself, rather than other people writing what you should be contributing. And I can only see inflation going through the roof here. RPI was 12.3. Forget the CPI fiddle figures. The RPI on the 19th of this month was 12.3. That's only going one way. And I saw in the late 80s, money I was borrowing at the time, 7%. That went to 17 in 90 days. And we have similar situations today. So do be careful on interest rates and inflation. That's your biggest. And then you've got the currency issue. Pre-Brexit, we were at 134. What are we today? 114.3, something like that. So that's been a steady decline for a long time.
Okay. So, now, I know from speaking to you, John, that quite a lot of the people you advise, and you don't, you pick and choose because you don't want to handle too many clients, but quite a lot of the people you talk to moving to Portugal are deciding to get a golden visa rather than another kind of visa. And as we've heard from our earlier presenters, the golden visa can be applied for under in various ways. Just tell us very briefly, how does somebody decide? What are the pros and cons of deciding whether to invest in a golden visa by buying a property or, for example, by putting money into one of the private equity funds that were being talked about earlier today?
There's no right answer. There's only the answer that's appropriate for the client. Suppose, for instance, you were 5-6 years off retirement. You were concerned the golden visa might not exist at that time. Well, but you don't want to manage property. Well, the fund route is actually a perfectly acceptable way of doing it and does actually save you some taxes on the stamp duty side of things. And if you get a diversified property portfolio managed by competent people, well, that makes sense. Some more entrepreneurial people will say, well, fine, I'll buy a rental property and put it into a rental pool. I don't mind taking greater risk and greater costs. So that's fine. If they want to live in the property and they want to live in Madeira and they want to get the golden visa, that being part of the solution, then plainly their primary home is how they would buy. But it's down to the individual client. It's got to be a bespoke service. You're doing this transaction once, and we've got to get it right first time.
Okay. And just for information, some of our chamber members are in the investment fund field, so we have a couple of examples next door of investment funds if you want to find out a bit more information about how the investment fund option works for gold visas. Now, moving on, I'd like to introduce our next panelist. Yes, if you could share microphones, that would be great. I'd like to present to the audience Paul Correa, who's the Managing Director of Fiduciary Wealth Management. Paul, tell us a little bit about Fiduciary Wealth Management. What sort of services do you provide? And what would you like to tell the audience about your services?
Well, just a bit of background on Fiduciary Wealth. Fiduciary Wealth is associated to the oldest law practice in Gibraltar, which was founded in 1892. So it has a long history. But we also happen to be a member firm of MGI Worldwide, which is a top 20 ranked global accountancy network, represented by 10,000 professionals in 460 locations across 100 countries, driving $1 billion in revenue. So whereas we're in the field of wealth management, we've got legal roots on the one hand and accountancy, tax roots on another. My background, I worked in revenue and taxation for 6 years and then transitioned through financial services, being private banking and wealth management. I've been doing this for 33 years. In terms of our business, I think it's encapsulated in the slide there. It's all about serving the British expatriate community, moving to anywhere in the Iberian Peninsula, not just Portugal.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about how British citizens should prepare for leaving the UK, because that's as important as arriving in Portugal, isn't it? What preparations do you think people should be thinking about before they leave the UK?
Well, the preparation is really important. First, you need to plan, and then you have to execute your plan. So you need to consider so many things. We wouldn't be able to cover every single aspect. But I think to start with, you have to gather all the information you have on your pension, savings, and investments. You have to determine whether you have enough of a capital pot to support your lifestyle in retirement. You'd probably need to identify and consider both current and future sources of income and whether they can support that lifestyle. It'd probably be useful to do a cash flow analysis simulation using interchangeable variables to determine whether you have that income that is going to sustain that lifestyle. I think John mentioned inflation is running at 10-12%. That's the official figure. It's probably closer to 20. So that's eroding purchasing power. So that's really important. And then I think you need to consider the exit from the UK and the UK statutory residency test, which determines when you become non-resident in the UK. So the exit is important. Do you want to exit on the 5th of April, which is a clean tax year, which is ideal, or whether you'd rather do it a split tax year? And there's some guidance as to when a split tax year is allowable. So do you have you found employment abroad, or has your spouse secured employment abroad, or have you sold your main property, in which case a split tax year is perfectly permissible. And then just a couple of points probably worth covering is your UK domicile, and have you considered whether you have any potential liability to UK inheritance tax? I don't think we have sufficient time to cover the issue of UK domicile. But when you do your tax planning and you restructure your financial affairs, you should keep that firmly in mind. Identify any products and structures that's going to mitigate UK IHT, and consider the wider tax planning opportunity that exists when you exit one country and move to Portugal, because there are opportunities to maximize that purchasing power that John was referring to earlier. And of course, consider the impact of a change of residency on your assets and liabilities more generally. And besides that, I think one last point is, are your protection policies sufficient, and do they provide continuity of cover in Portugal? And those are just some of the steps.
Just some of the points. You've got many others, I'm sure, if people want to come and talk to you. So I'd like to move on to our next panel member, Tânia Castro, who's the General Manager of TPMc. Now, TPMc is based in Madeira, but again, your services apply throughout Portugal. Tânia, tell us a little bit about yourself and TPMc. What do you do in Madeira?
Hi, good morning. My name is Tânia Castro. You can hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
can hear you
fine.
fine.
Sometimes we don't have the notion. So we work from Madeira to the world for the past 28 years. UK is one of our main markets, and simply because we have a lot of questions, a lot of clients coming from UK to Madeira, but also several Portuguese going to UK also to do business. UK as a hub within other clients. So it's a constant for us to work with UK market and UK residents and entrepreneurs. For the past 28 years, we work in the accounting, in legal advising, in the corporate side, but for the past years, and I have to tell you that Brexit and also the pandemic has accelerated a lot. We have been noticing that a lot of people look to Madeira with different eyes. So they want a nice, and I'm not saying that UK is not nice, so our weather is better, so at least that. They look at Madeira as a good, stable, safe, very economically friendly place to live. A place where you can raise your kids, you have international schools, everybody speaks and writes in English, so you feel at home, and that's very important. But once you get into a home, you need to know what to do. So you got the visa, you have the lawyers already checking and the accountant checking what to do in the fiscal side. You have my colleagues also to help you. But you have all the other little things that you need to do, especially when you talk about the state, social security, your fiscal number, a fiscal representative. I want to move my stuff to my home. I need a dispatch company. Do I need to do anything more? So, and you need somebody to help you with that, because we know each country has its own rules, and you need to make sure that you're complying with everything. That's where we also can help you. So besides the accounting, besides the legal part, besides the acquisition process of the real estate, you need help with the little things that you need to do. And
That's what you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And tell us very briefly, before we talk to Abigail, recently in October, the Portuguese government has announced the creation of the new digital nomad visa.
Yeah.
Just tell us very briefly what that is.
Well, it will be in force starting the 31st of October, so it's not really in force yet. But the idea is to facilitate. I'm always very honest with people, with clients, even if that means that sometimes some businesses are not much. So the visa process, the residency process, you need to analyze very carefully which kind of residency process you will get. If you get a golden visa, you need to make sure that you're getting for the right reasons. If your intention is to, in fact, to live in Madeira, probably there's another kind of visa that you can get that does not involve the bureaucracy of a golden visa or the timeline that you need to wait until that kind of visa is also dealt with. So each case is a case you need to make sure that is your case. In order to facilitate, because Portugal, and I'm sure you noticed that, is very high quoted in terms of high-tech, young entrepreneur, virtual currency, NFTs, a lot of digital entrepreneurs coming to Madeira and to Portugal to live. And one of the difficulties they have is, I need a place to work where I can live. That can be nice, but also can get me fiscal benefits, which they can have with the non-habitual. But I need a way to do it, a vehicle that can be faster than going to a standard visa, because I want to be here for 1 year or 2 years, work a lot, save money, and probably 2 years from now I'll be in another country. So this kind of visa will help people with it. The government aim is to be faster, simpler, but also a proper path to a proper and an individual case like the digital nomad.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. Our fourth and newest recruit to the chamber, is Abigail Lewis, who's the head of school for Nobel Algarve British International School. Now, the Nobel schools in Portugal are part of the Globeducate group, but Abby, many of our audience and lots of our chamber inquiries are about moving their families to Portugal and how does the schooling work? Now, obviously, you're based in the Algarve, but the schooling system is the same in Madeira, the Algarve, Lisbon, wherever it might be. Perhaps you could explain just briefly to us how a British family moving their children to Portugal what would they look at in terms of the education system? They'd put them into the Portuguese system or the international school, which you would represent. Tell us a little bit about how it all works.
Thank you. So I'm Abby Lewis, the head of Nobel Algarve British International School. So when people come, they have choices about schools that they send their children to. So you could send your child to a public school, which follows the Portuguese national approved system, and that's all in Portuguese. So lots of people who move to Portugal choose to send their child to an independent school, like my school. So my school educates students from age 3 up to age 18. So it means if a family moves in, then usually all their children can come to one school. We have half our students follow the Portuguese national curriculum, but over half our students follow the English national curriculum. That means that at the end of year 11, they sit IGCSEs, and at the end of year 13, they sit their A-levels. It means a very seamless move because they move from year 4 here in the UK to our year 4. But we find A-levels particularly useful. So lots of our students leave us and come back to the UK to study. So students who left me in the summer are at UCL and King's in London and Imperial, but Bath and Bristol and Leeds universities. But actually quite a few of our students want to stay in Portugal. So we work with the Ministry of Education to do a conversions, and so that our students can also go to Portuguese universities, and that's becoming more and more popular. Lots of students want to study in Holland at the moment, actually. So whether they sort of hail from the UK, they want to go to Holland. We every year get students who go to the USA because A-levels are really easy for other universities to understand. So we find it works really well.
Okay, interesting. Right, now, you've heard from all of our 4 panellists here. We are going to go to a coffee break very shortly, but before we do, just to recap this first half of the seminar, gentlemen and ladies, I'm going to ask each of you briefly to tell our audience, what is the one piece of advice? You've now, all of you, been through them, you've moved to Portugal or you live there already. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to anybody moving? John, you first. What's the first thing, most important thing you'd tell people to do?
Stop procrastinating. No, don't try and make this leap across this chasm in 2 leaps. You'll finish up a mess. Right? Make a decision, stick with it, and make it work. And the sooner the better. I don't know who the government is today, but the sooner the better.
Paul, what would your advice be to the audience?
Failing to plan is planning to fail. So put a strategy in place. You need a timeline, and then you need to follow it through and execute on the strategy. And I would say, don't miss any key steps. It's really, really important that you know what you're doing and you're doing it in the right order. And then, don't Google to establish the steps that you need to take to get to do this properly. I think it's really important that you're not penny wise, pound foolish. That you really take the time to go through the whole process. Yeah.
Tânia, what would you say? You've seen lots and lots of people as your clients moving to Portugal. What's the one piece of advice you would give?
So I have to tell you that I agree with Paul, because a lot of clients come to the office and they say, well, I read this and I read that and I Googled this, and there are a lot of accurate information in the Google, but there's a lot of not accurate information. So please get informed with people who work in the place, who understand the place, who talk the same language. And once you get the information, then you can properly decide if it's the best option for you, because you will have the information that will give you that, and it will allow you to do the best information, the best decision possible.
Wonderful. Abigail, you've seen lots of families arrive. What's the one piece of advice you would give people before
I would say just do it. Our kids are so happy. They go on to universities that they want to go to and get amazing jobs. But honestly, they're in a community of 40 different nationalities, so they learn to be global citizens. They really are outward looking and really, really confident and really driven. So I'd say do it. It's the best thing you can do for your children.
Wonderful. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you to our panel. And